My name is Rachel, and my life was peaceful and serene until one day, everything changed. My husband, David, is a successful, kind-hearted businessman who has always been my rock and refuge. We met when I was already over 30, and since then, I've cherished every moment with him. Even though he had children from a previous marriage, I embraced his family as my own. It was a tough decision, but I chose to become the stepmother of his son, Alex. Alex, a lively young man in his early 20s, was just beginning his journey into adulthood. Our relationship wasn't easy, but I tried everything to earn his trust and respect. Then, one day, things took a turn for the worse. David had to leave for a business trip, leaving me alone in the house with Alex. It was supposed to be an ordinary trip, nothing special. David and I had grown used to these separations. At first, everything was quiet, but soon, the trouble began. Alex started coming home late, ignoring the house rules David had set. I tried talking to him, but he would just laugh and walk away before I could even finish. That's when I realized our relationship was hanging by a thread. He didn't take me seriously, and he didn't respect my opinions. Determined to take control of the situation, I decided to show him that his actions had consequences. One night, while Alex was asleep, I took his car keys. It was my way of saying enough is enough. But instead of understanding, Alex only grew angrier. He stormed home late that night, just as I was about to fall asleep, and yelled at me. I tried to remain calm, but inside I was boiling with frustration. His eyes were filled with rage and confusion. He simply couldn't accept that I was trying to restore some order. That was the beginning of our struggle for respect and trust, but I never could have imagined the consequences it would bring. During those moments, I often thought of David and wondered what he would say if he knew what was happening at home. But unfortunately, he was far away, and I was left alone with our problems. After the incident with the car keys, things only got worse. Alex became even more defiant. He often stayed out late, and when he did come home, his behavior was increasingly rebellious. I realized that my attempts to establish order were only making him more resistant, but I wasn't going to give up. One night, when Alex came home late again, I decided it was time for a serious talk. He walked into the house, slamming the door behind him, barely glancing at me with an expression full of disdain. I took a deep breath and approached him. "Alex, we need to talk," I said firmly. He stopped and turned to me, his face filled with irritation. "What do you want to talk about, Rachel? That you're trying to control my life." His voice dripped with sarcasm. "It's not about control, Alex. It's about concern. I just want you to respect the rules your father put in place. We all live in this house, and we need to consider each other," I responded, trying to keep my voice steady. He scoffed and shook his head. "You'll never be my mother, Rachel. You're just his wife, nothing more," he said coldly. Those words cut deep. I had always known I could never replace Alex's mother, but hearing it so bluntly hurt more than I expected. I felt tears welling up, but I refused to let them fall. "I understand that I can't replace your mother, Alex, but I'm here to support you, to help you. All I ask for is a little respect," I said, trying to sound gentle but firm. He stared at me in silence for a few seconds before turning and walking away to his room. I stood in the hallway, feeling the weight of our conversation pressing down on me. I knew our relationship was at a breaking point, and if I didn't find a way to reach him, the consequences could be disastrous. The next day, Andrew left on another business trip, and I knew that now everything was up to me. Alex invited his friends over again, and one night, the house was filled with loud music and laughter. It was another party, and I felt powerless. I stayed in my room for a long time, listening to the booming music and the chatter from the living room. At first, I wanted to just close my eyes and hope it would all end on its own. But then I realized I couldn't let this continue. Summoning my courage, I threw on my robe and went downstairs. When I walked into the living room, I was shocked. Empty bottles, pizza boxes, and cigarette butts were scattered everywhere. Alex and his friends hadn't even noticed I was there. I walked over to the stereo and turned off the music. The noise stopped, and all eyes turned to me. "Alex, we need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked at me, his eyes gleaming with defiance. "What now, Rachel? Haven't you said enough?" he replied coldly. "You can't keep acting like this. This is our home, and I'm asking you to respect it," I said, trying not to let my frustration show. "Maybe you should just relax and join us," one of his friends suggested, and everyone laughed. I felt my pulse racing in my temples. This wasn't just about order in the house anymore. It was a fight for respect and understanding, and I was determined not to back down. "No, Alex. This is unacceptable," I said firmly. "Always so serious, Rachel." "Maybe you really should relax," Alex continued, stepping closer to me. I looked him straight in the eye, feeling my resolve solidify. "I won't tolerate this in our home, Alex. If you can't follow the rules, you'll have to find somewhere else for your parties," I said, trying to speak with as much calm as I could muster. He remained silent, his gaze still icy, then turned abruptly and headed for the door, signaling his friends to follow. The moment the door clicked shut behind them, I felt my strength drain away. I sank slowly into a chair, feeling the tears start to roll down my cheeks. This was my first small victory, but deep inside, I knew the real challenges were yet to come. The next morning, I woke up with a heavy heart. The house was quiet and empty, but I knew this was just the calm before the storm. Alex had apparently spent the night at a friend's place, and I had no idea how he would react when he returned. I tried to distract myself with my usual tasks, but my thoughts kept drifting back to him and what had happened. By the afternoon, Alex came home. His face was serious, and the defiance in his eyes was gone. He passed by me in the kitchen without a word and started making himself dinner. I felt this was the right moment to talk, so I decided to approach him. "Alex, can we talk?" I asked, trying to speak with both gentleness and firmness. He paused and looked at me, then nodded. "Sure, talk," he said, sitting down at the table. "I know you're an adult, and I'm not trying to control every minute of your life," I began, "but in our house, there have to be rules. Not just for me, but for Andrew too. He wouldn't want what happened last night to happen again." Alex stared at me, his face blank. "You're right, Rachel," he finally said. "I messed up. But you have to understand, it's hard for me too. I'm used to having control over my own life, and sometimes it's tough to accept new rules." His confession took me by surprise. It was the first time he had shown any real honesty, and I felt like there was finally a chance for us to improve our relationship. "I understand that it's difficult for you," I replied, "but let's try to find a compromise. I don't want to be your enemy, Alex. I want to help you, just like any mother would help her son." Alex nodded, and for the first time, I saw a spark of understanding in his eyes. "All right," he said quietly. "Let's give it a shot." That small victory gave me confidence. I felt like we had taken a step in the right direction, but I had no idea that our trials were far from over. Later that night, just as I was getting ready for bed, I heard noise downstairs. I went down and saw that Alex had brought his friends over again. "Alex, what's going on?" I asked, feeling anxiety tighten in my chest. "We're just playing some video games," he replied, avoiding eye contact. "You promised there wouldn't be any more loud parties," I reminded him. "This isn't a party," Alex said, brushing off my concern. "We're just playing, and then we'll leave." I sighed, realizing this wasn't the time for another conflict. "All right, but please keep it down and don't stay too late," I asked. He nodded, and I returned to my bedroom. I lay in bed for a long time, listening to the muffled sounds from the living room. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I fell asleep. In the middle of the night, I woke up with a strange feeling. When I opened my eyes, I saw Alex standing in the doorway of my bedroom, looking disoriented and a little scared. "Alex? What's wrong?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "Rachel, I'm sorry for everything. I didn't mean to hurt you," he said as he stepped closer. "It's all right, Alex. What matters is that you understand I'm not your enemy," I responded, feeling the tension between us start to melt away. He sat down at the edge of the bed and quietly said, "I just want everything to be okay. I want us to live in peace." At that moment, I realized we had finally formed a real connection. This was an important step toward building a relationship based on trust. We talked for a long time, and I felt the weight of the past few days slowly lifting. The next morning, I woke up with a renewed sense of hope. Our conversation the night before seemed to have opened the door to possible reconciliation. I was determined to do everything I could to strengthen our relationship. As I was having breakfast, I heard Alex coming down the stairs. He seemed calmer than usual, and there was no trace of the defiance in his eyes. "Good morning, Alex," I said with a smile. "How did you sleep?" "Good morning, Rachel." "I slept well, thanks," he replied, sitting down at the table. We ate in silence, but it was a comforting silence. I could feel that we were finally starting to build mutual understanding. After breakfast, I suggested we go for a walk, and he agreed. We went to a nearby park, and as we walked, we talked about all sorts of things. Alex shared his plans for the future and how he wanted to advance in his career. I gave him my thoughts and advice. It was the first time we had really spoken as a family. I saw in him not just a troubled young man, but someone with dreams and ambitions. "You know, Rachel, I never thought I'd be able to talk to you so openly," he said as we stopped by a pond. "Neither did I, Alex, but I'm glad we have this chance. I want you to know that I'll always be here to support you," I said sincerely. He nodded, and we continued our walk. When we returned home, I felt that we had made real progress. However, that night, something happened that made me doubt our improvement. Alex suggested we have dinner together and share a bottle of wine. I was surprised by his proposal but accepted, hoping it would bring us even closer. We prepared dinner together, and everything was going wonderfully. He was attentive, caring, and his eyes showed genuine interest. After dinner, Alex suggested we play some board games, and we spent a pleasant evening together. At one point, I felt tired and decided to go to bed. Alex walked me to my room, and I thanked him for the wonderful evening. "Thank you, Alex. It's been a great night. I'm really glad we could spend time together," I said, hugging him as I said goodnight. "Me too, Rachel." "Good night," he replied with a soft smile. I went to bed feeling satisfied and at peace. But in the middle of the night, I was startled awake by a strange noise. When I opened my eyes, I saw Alex standing at my bedroom door. Alex stood in the doorway of my room, looking worried and confused. My heart raced with a mix of concern and surprise. "Alex, what's wrong?" I asked, sitting up in bed, trying to keep my voice calm. He moved closer, his eyes full of uncertainty. "Rachel, I can't sleep. I need to talk to you," he said quietly, sitting at the edge of my bed. "Of course. Tell me what's on your mind," I replied, a sense of unease beginning to creep in. "I'm afraid that our relationship will never be normal," he confessed, his voice trembling slightly. "I want everything to be okay, but I feel like I'm failing." His words hit me deeply. It was clear how much he wanted to fix things, how much he was struggling internally. I could see the vulnerability in his eyes, the genuine desire to make things right. "Alex, it's normal to have fears and doubts," I began, trying to offer comfort. "We all make mistakes, but what matters is that we learn from them and move forward. I believe we can make this work." He nodded, though the worry didn't completely leave his face. "Thank you. You're right. I just want things to be okay," he whispered, standing up from the bed. "They will be, Alex. We'll get through this together," I said with a reassuring smile. He lingered for a moment longer, as if he wanted to say something more but couldn't find the words. Then, with a quiet goodnight, he left the room. I lay back down, but sleep didn't come easily. My thoughts swirled around our conversation, wondering how deep Alex's struggles went and how we could truly rebuild trust. The following days were peaceful. Alex seemed more at ease, making a conscious effort to be polite and considerate. I could feel the fragile peace we were building, though I knew it could be easily shattered if we weren't careful. We avoided discussing past conflicts and focused on the present, which seemed to be working for us. One evening, when Aaron had left again on another business trip, Alex suggested we have a family dinner. I was hesitant at first, given everything that had happened, but I decided to give it a chance. We prepared the meal together, laughing and sharing stories. It was a pleasant evening that, while seemingly ordinary, meant a lot to both of us. After dinner, Alex suggested we have a glass of wine. I hesitated, but thought it might help us bond even more. We sat in the living room, talking and enjoying the moment. Alex seemed relaxed and happy, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like things were beginning to improve. Rachel, thank you, Alex said, raising his glass. You've always been kind to me, even when I didn't deserve it. I just want us to be a real family, Alex, I replied with a smile. The night went by peacefully, and soon I felt tired. I said goodnight to Alex and went to bed, feeling content and hopeful. But in the middle of the night, something strange happened. I was startled awake by that same strange feeling I had experienced before. When I opened my eyes, Alex was standing in the doorway of my room again, his face tense and his eyes filled with worry. Alex, what's wrong? I asked, trying to keep my growing anxiety under control. Rachel, I need to show you something, he said, walking closer to the bed. What is it, Alex? I asked, my heart racing as he approached, holding his phone out toward me. He handed me the phone, and I saw a video playing on the screen. My breath caught in my throat as I tried to process what I was looking at. It was footage from one of the nights when Alex had his friends over, but something about it felt off. What does this mean, Alex? I asked, my voice trembling as tears began to prick at my eyes. I didn't want this to happen, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I just wanted to make sure you were okay after that party, but things got out of hand. His words sent a wave of disbelief through me. I couldn't comprehend why he had recorded something like this, something so personal, something that felt like such a betrayal. This is unacceptable, Alex, I said, my voice firm even as my emotions churned inside me. I trusted you, and you took advantage of that trust. I know I messed up. I'm willing to accept any punishment, but please forgive me, Rachel. I'll fix this, he pleaded, his voice shaking. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, trying to think clearly. Our relationship had already been fragile, but this felt like it was teetering on the edge of collapse. Still, I knew that this could be a turning point, a chance to reset everything if we handled it right. We'll talk about this tomorrow, I said finally, needing space to process everything. I need time to think. He nodded silently and left the room, leaving me alone with the weight of everything that had just unfolded. I lay down again, but sleep was impossible. My mind was racing, and I felt emotionally drained, unsure of how to move forward. The next morning, I woke up feeling heavy and drained. The events of the previous night played over and over in my mind. I knew that confronting this situation head-on was necessary, but I still wasn't sure how we could rebuild trust after something like this. When I walked into the kitchen, Alex was already there, looking exhausted and defeated. He didn't meet my eyes as I poured myself a cup of coffee. Good morning, Rachel, he said softly, his voice barely audible. Good morning, I replied, sitting down at the table. The air between us was thick with tension, and the silence was suffocating. Finally, Alex spoke again, breaking the silence. I'm so sorry for what I did. I know I betrayed your trust, and I'll do anything to make it right. I looked at him, seeing the genuine remorse in his eyes. You need to understand how serious this is, Alex, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a violation of trust. I know, he whispered, his eyes brimming with regret. I understand that now, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn your forgiveness. First things first, I said firmly. Delete the video. Right now. Without hesitation, Alex pulled out his phone, deleted the video in front of me, and handed me the phone to show it was done. I felt a small sense of relief, but I knew this was just the beginning of a long road to healing. And now, I continued, you have to work on proving that you can be trusted again. It's going to take time, Alex, but if you're serious about changing, I'm willing to give you that chance. He nodded, his eyes filled with determination. I will prove it to you, Rachel. I promise. The day passed with tension still lingering in the air, but there was a glimmer of hope. Alex seemed sincere in his desire to make amends, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like maybe we could get through this. That night, just as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard a soft knock at my door. I hesitated for a moment before calling out. Come in. Alex stepped into the room, looking uncertain. Rachel, I'm sorry to bother you, but I need to talk to you. Alex, we've talked about this, I said, feeling a mix of concern and frustration. Let's talk tomorrow. Please, Rachel, he insisted. It's important. I sighed and motioned for him to sit at the edge of the bed. What is it? I know it's hard for you to trust me again after everything that's happened, he began, his voice trembling slightly. But I need you to know that I really do want to change. I want to make things right. I understand that, Alex, I replied gently. But it's going to take time. Trust isn't something that can be rebuilt overnight. I'm willing to do the work, he said, his voice filled with sincerity. I just want you to see that I'm serious. I looked at him, feeling a wave of emotion wash over me. Despite everything, I could see how much he wanted to make things right, how much he was struggling to fix what had been broken. I believe you, Alex, I said softly. But we have to take this one step at a time. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of everything still hanging in the air, but there was also a sense of hope, a feeling that, maybe, things could get better. I'll work hard to earn your trust back, he whispered before standing up to leave. Thank you for giving me that chance. As he left the room, I lay back down, feeling a cautious sense of optimism. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, I believed that maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild what had been broken. I sat at the chair in the quiet kitchen, listening to the faint sound of Abigail moving around upstairs. My mind was racing, but my body felt numb, frozen in place by the weight of what had just happened. When I heard her footsteps coming down, I braced myself. She walked into the kitchen, stopping short when she saw the mess I'd made, the shattered dishes, the ruined cake, and me, sitting silently amidst it all. Her eyes widened in shock, and for a brief moment, I saw fear flicker across her face. Mick, what did you do? She asked, her voice trembling. I stood up slowly, staring at her with a calm I didn't feel. What did I do, Abigail? I repeated, my voice eerily even. No, the question is, what did you do? She took a step back, clearly realizing the gravity of the situation. Mick, please let me explain. It's not what you think. I cut her off, my patience snapping. Not what I think, I said, my voice rising. I found some kid in our bed, Abigail. Our bed. She flinched, but I didn't care. I wanted answers, and I wasn't about to let her brush this off with another excuse. I'm sorry, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. I don't know what happened. I've just been so lost, so overwhelmed. I made a mistake. I shook my head, my heart aching with betrayal. A mistake? You're calling this a mistake? You brought him into our home, Abigail. You lied to me. All this time, I thought you were just stressed from work. I've been trying to help you, trying to be understanding, and this is how you repay me? She started crying, but I didn't feel any sympathy. The image of that boy in our bed, the mess she had made of our life, was too fresh, too painful. I don't know what to say, she sobbed. I never wanted to hurt you, Mick. I don't know why I did it. I let out a bitter laugh. You don't know why, I said, shaking my head. Well, you've sure done a hell of a job. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. She stood there, tears streaming down her face, while I stood with my arms crossed, my emotions battling between anger and devastation. Abigail wiped her tears and tried to step closer, her voice softer now, pleading. Mick, please. I know I messed up, but I love you. I want to fix this. I don't want to lose everything we've built together. I stood still, my arms still crossed, my gaze cold. Do you think love justifies what you've done? You think we can just sweep this under the rug and go back to how things were? I could hear the anger in my own voice, but there was no stopping it now. I had spent too long bottling up my frustrations, my efforts to keep our family together, only for it to crumble before me. I don't expect things to be the same, she said, her voice cracking. I know I hurt you, and I'll do anything to make it right. But please, Mick, don't give up on us. I turned away from her, running my hand over my face as I tried to clear my thoughts. I don't know if I can do that, Abigail. I don't know if I'll ever be able to look at you the same way again. Her sobbing intensified, and part of me wanted to feel sorry for her, but I couldn't. Not after everything I'd seen. Not after finding her betrayal staring me in the face in our own home. I had loved her, trusted her, and she had thrown it all away for a fling with some kid. I needed space. I needed to breathe. Without another word, I walked past her and headed for the door. She called after me, but I didn't stop. I needed to get out of that house, away from her, away from everything that reminded me of how my life had just fallen apart. I slammed the door behind me and got into my truck, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I sat there, breathing heavily, my mind racing with all the things I wanted to say, but couldn't. It was like a storm was brewing inside of me, and I didn't know how to calm it. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, not sure where I was going or what I was trying to find. I just needed to escape, to figure out how I was supposed to handle this mess. When I finally pulled over, the sun had already set, and I found myself parked by the same park where Abigail and I had walked with our son just a few weeks ago, when everything still felt normal. I closed my eyes, resting my head on the steering wheel as the weight of everything pressed down on me. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I could ever forgive her. As I sat there, staring out at the park, memories of happier times flooded my mind. Our first date, the day we brought our son into the world, and the way Abigail used to smile at me like I was the only person who mattered. It was hard to reconcile those memories with the betrayal I had uncovered. The woman I had loved for so many years had become a stranger, someone capable of deceit I never thought possible. My phone buzzed in my pocket, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was a message from Abigail. "Mick, please come home. We need to talk. I can't fix this if you're not here." I read the message a few times, feeling the conflict tugging at me. Part of me wanted to go back, to hear her out, to try and understand what led her down this path. But the other part, the part that had seen the wreckage of our marriage in that messy house, wanted nothing to do with her. I didn't respond. Instead, I sat there in silence, watching the empty swings sway in the breeze. I thought about our son, about how he deserved better than this mess. He was too young to understand what was happening, but one day he would. And what kind of example would I be setting if I didn't at least try to make things right? With a heavy sigh, I started the engine and headed home. The drive was short, but it felt like an eternity. My hands were sweating on the steering wheel, my heart pounding in my chest as I approached the house. The lights were still on inside, and through the window, I could see Abigail pacing back and forth, wringing her hands. She looked like she was on the edge of breaking down, and maybe she was. But I couldn't afford to think about her feelings right now. I had to keep control of my own. When I stepped inside, she stopped pacing and looked at me with wide, tear-filled eyes. "Mick," she started, her voice shaky. "I don't even know where to begin." I closed the door behind me and stood in the hallway, arms crossed. "Start with the truth," I said coldly. "Why did you do it?" She wiped her eyes and took a deep breath, her whole body trembling. "I don't know," she admitted. "I was lost. I felt trapped in this routine. Work, home, work, home. I wasn't happy, Mick, but I didn't know how to tell you that. And then, I don't know. I made a mistake." I shook my head. "A mistake? Abigail, this wasn't some slip-up. You've been lying to me for months, bringing that kid into our house, into our bed. You betrayed everything we've built together." "I know," she sobbed, falling to her knees, her face buried in her hands. "I know, Mick, and I'm so sorry. I hate myself for what I've done, but I didn't know how to stop. I felt like I had no control over anything." I stood there, watching her crumble before me, but I couldn't find the sympathy I used to feel for her. All I could think about was how shattered my trust was. How was I supposed to move forward from this? Could I? "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said, my voice low. "I don't know if we can ever go back to the way things were." Abigail looked up at me, her face streaked with tears, desperation written all over her features. "Please, Mick. I'll do anything. I'll go to therapy, I'll quit my job, whatever it takes. I don't want to lose you." I took a deep breath, closing my eyes for a moment as I tried to gather my thoughts. "You should have thought about that before you threw everything away," I said, my voice hard. "Right now, I need space. I need time to think." I turned and walked toward the door, leaving her sobbing on the floor behind me. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I walked out of the house, the weight of everything pressing down on me like a heavy stone. The cool night air hit my face, but it did little to clear my mind. I needed space, not just physically, but emotionally. The walls of that house had become suffocating, filled with too many memories, both good and bad. As I drove aimlessly through the quiet streets, I couldn't stop the whirlwind of thoughts. I had given Abigail everything. I had trusted her, loved her, built a family with her. And yet, she had shattered all of that in a single moment. It wasn't just the betrayal that stung, it was the lies, the deception, the thought that while I was working, protecting people, she was sneaking around behind my back. My mind kept going back to the boy in our house, the way he had been so casual about it, like he had no idea of the destruction he was part of. And maybe he didn't. Maybe Abigail had fed him lies, told him it didn't matter.
But it mattered to me.
It mattered more than anything. Eventually, I pulled over in front of a small park where I used to take our son to play. The swings swayed gently in the breeze, the empty playground eerily quiet at this late hour. I sat there, staring at those swings, thinking about how much was at stake. It wasn't just my relationship with Abigail on the line, it was our family, our son. How was I supposed to explain all of this to him one day? How could I ever face him knowing that his mother and I had let everything fall apart? My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I instinctively reached for it. It was a text from Abigail. "Please come home. I'll do anything. I'm sorry, Mick." I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the screen. What could I even say? There were no words that could undo the damage, no apology that could fix the trust that had been destroyed. Instead of replying, I put the phone down and leaned back in my seat, closing my eyes. What was I supposed to do now? My heart felt torn in two. Part of me wanted to believe that we could fix this, that somehow, after all the pain and betrayal, we could rebuild what was broken. But the other part of me, the part that had seen the mess in our house and the look on that kid's face, knew that some things couldn't be repaired. I spent hours there, just sitting in the car, lost in my thoughts. It wasn't until the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon that I realized how much time had passed. My mind was still a mess, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't go back.
Not yet.
Maybe not ever. I started the car and drove back to my mother's house. When I arrived, my son was still asleep, and my mom was quietly sipping her morning coffee at the kitchen table. She looked up at me as I walked in, concern etched across her face. "You look like you didn't sleep at all," she said softly. "I didn't," I replied, collapsing into the chair across from her. "I don't even know what to do anymore, Mom." She reached across the table and placed a comforting hand on mine. "You don't have to decide everything right now, Mick.
Take your time.
Figure out what's best for you and your son." I nodded, but the weight of everything still pressed down on me. "I don't even know if I can forgive her," I admitted. "How do you move on from something like this?" My mother sighed, her eyes filled with sympathy. "Forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about finding a way to heal. But sometimes it takes time. And sometimes you can't forgive. And that's okay too." I stared down at the cup of coffee in front of me, the steam rising in gentle curls. "I just want to do what's right for my son," I said quietly. "He deserves better than this." My mother squeezed my hand gently. "He does. And so do you." The following days passed in a blur of uncertainty. I spent most of my time at my mom's place, trying to make sense of what had happened and what the next step should be. Abigail had called and texted me numerous times, pleading for forgiveness, for another chance. But each time, I found myself staring at the phone, unable to respond. I threw myself into work, hoping it would distract me from the mess that had become my personal life. The fire station was busy, as usual, and my colleagues kept me occupied with calls and the usual banter. But there was a cloud hanging over me, a heavy, unshakable weight that followed me wherever I went. One night, after a particularly grueling shift, I found myself sitting in my truck outside the fire station, too exhausted to drive home. I had intended to head back to my mom's, to spend the night in the familiar, comforting environment. But my hands wouldn't start the engine. Instead, I sat there, staring at the city lights in the distance, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Abigail. It was a message from one of my friends, Adam, who I hadn't spoken to in a while. "Hey man, heard what happened. Just wanted to say I'm here if you need anything." I didn't realize how much I needed that message until I read it. It was simple, no pressure, no judgment, just support. I texted back, telling him I appreciated it and promised to grab a drink with him soon. Maybe that's what I needed, a break. A chance to breathe, to step away from the wreckage of my life for a moment and just feel like myself again. I drove to the nearest bar, a quiet place where no one would bother me. I wasn't in the mood to talk, but I needed to be somewhere other than my truck or my mom's house. The bartender didn't ask any questions, just lit a drink in front of me, and I nursed it slowly, staring at the muted TV screen in the corner. The bar was mostly empty, and the quiet atmosphere was exactly what I needed. For the first time in days, my mind felt still. Not peaceful, but still. As I sat there, sipping my drink, I couldn't help but think about what my mother had said, about forgiveness and healing. Was it possible? Could I ever look at Abigail the same way again? And if I couldn't, what did that mean for our family? For our son? The thought of leaving, of walking away for good, felt like a betrayal of the life we had built together. But staying felt like a betrayal of myself. I was stuck, trapped between two impossible choices. Just as I was about to order another drink, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a picture. From Abigail. It was of our son, playing in the backyard, his small face lit up with a bright, innocent smile. Underneath the photo, she had written, "He misses you. So do I." I stared at the picture, my heart aching. I missed him too, more than I could put into words. But the idea of going back to that house, of facing Abigail and pretending everything could be normal again, felt impossible. I paid my tab and left the bar, walking out into the cool night air. The city was quiet, the streets mostly empty at this hour. I wandered for a while, letting my feet take me wherever they wanted, not thinking about where I was headed. Eventually, I ended up at a small park, one that I used to take my son to when he was younger. The swings swayed gently in the breeze, just like they had the last time I was here. It felt like a lifetime ago, like everything had been so simple back then. I sat down on a bench, staring at the playground, lost in thought. The picture of my son was still on my phone, and I kept glancing at it, wondering what he would think of me if he ever knew the truth. If he ever found out what had happened between his mother and me. Could I forgive Abigail? Could I stay in that house, knowing what she had done? Or would I walk away, leave it all behind, and try to start over? The weight of the decision felt crushing, but I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. At some point, I would have to choose. And no matter what I decided, someone was going to get hurt. A few days later, I finally decided to meet with Abigail. I couldn't keep avoiding the conversation, especially since it wasn't just about us. It was about our son, too. I needed answers, closure, and maybe a plan for moving forward, no matter how painful that might be. I called her and suggested we meet at a small cafe, far from the house, where we could talk without distractions. Abigail agreed, her voice quiet and shaky, as if she'd been waiting for this moment as much as I had. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting at a corner table, nervously stirring a cup of tea. Her eyes were red, like she hadn't slept in days, and the tension in the air was palpable. As soon as I sat down, she looked up at me, her face full of guilt and regret. "I'm so sorry," she whispered before I could say anything. "I never meant to hurt you, Mick. I was lost and I don't know what I was thinking." I nodded, my heart heavy with a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, confusion. "I just need to understand why, Abigail. What happened? Why did you do it?" She took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she set the spoon down. "It wasn't about you. It was never about you. I love you, Mick, I do. But somewhere along the way, I lost myself. The routine, the exhaustion, the pressure. I felt like I was suffocating. And instead of talking to you, instead of asking for help, I made a terrible mistake. I thought I could escape it, but all I did was destroy everything we built." Her words hit me hard. I understood the feeling of being overwhelmed, of wanting to escape the monotony of life. But still, it didn't excuse what she had done. You should have talked to me, I said quietly. We could have worked through it together. You didn't have to turn to him. I know, she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. I know that now. But at the time, I wasn't thinking clearly. I was selfish, and I was wrong. I can't change what I did, but I want to make it right. I want to fix this, if you'll let me. I stared at her for a long moment, torn between the love I still felt for her and the pain she had caused. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to move on, and try to rebuild what we had. But another part of me wasn't sure if I could ever trust her again. Do you think we can ever get back to what we had? I asked, my voice heavy with uncertainty. Abigail shook her head slowly, wiping a tear from her cheek. I don't know. I hope so, but I know it'll take time. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn your trust again, Mick. I don't want to lose you, or our family. We sat in silence for a few minutes, both of us lost in thought. The cafe around us seemed to fade away, leaving only the weight of our conversation. Eventually, I sighed, rubbing my temples. I need time, Abigail, I finally said. I need time to figure out if I can get past this. If we can move forward. She nodded, her face a mix of hope and sorrow. I understand. I'll give you all the time you need. For now, that was the only promise I could give her. I wasn't ready to make a decision, and I wasn't sure how long it would take before I could. But at least we had finally talked. At least we had taken the first step toward something. After I hit her, Abigail crumbled onto the floor, and everything felt like it shattered with her. The woman I once loved, the one I thought I knew better than anyone, now seemed like a stranger lying on the ground in our kitchen. The house, too, had transformed from a home into a chaotic mess of betrayal and broken trust. I stood there for a moment, staring at the wreckage of our life together. My hands were trembling, and a pit of guilt and anger boiled inside me. I looked around the kitchen, still strewn with dirty dishes and trash, and everything felt distant. I didn't feel like the man I was just an hour ago. Everything seemed to slow down as I walked over to the stove. Without thinking, I unscrewed the burners one by one, letting the quiet hiss of gas fill the air. My thoughts were scattered, but I knew one thing. I couldn't be here anymore. I grabbed a cigarette from the pack on the floor, lit it, and placed it carefully on a plate, letting it burn as a silent clock ticking down. I left the house and started walking. My feet carried me further and further away, the echo of the explosion behind me sealing a chapter of my life I would never return to. I walked aimlessly for what felt like hours, my mind still reeling from everything that had just happened. The quiet streets around me seemed so ordinary, so peaceful, in stark contrast to the chaos I had left behind. My feet led me through familiar neighborhoods, but everything felt different now. I was different. By the time I stopped, I found myself near a park where Abigail and I had once brought our son to play. The sight of the swings gently swaying in the breeze made my chest tighten with regret. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and for a moment, I considered ignoring it. But then, I pulled it out and saw my mother's name on the screen. Taking a deep breath, I answered, trying to steady my voice. Hey, Mom. Mick, where are you? Are you okay? Her voice was filled with concern, and I could hear my son's laughter in the background. I'm fine, I lied, forcing the words out. I just needed some air. You haven't been home for hours. Is everything okay with you and Abigail? For a split second, I wanted to tell her everything, to unload the truth, to confess what I had done. But the words got stuck in my throat. Yeah, I replied, my voice hollow. Everything's fine. I'll be home soon. All right, she said slowly, not entirely convinced. Your son's asking for you. I'll be there soon, I repeated and hung up. Sitting down on a park bench, I let the reality of what I had done crash over me. My marriage was in ruins, my home destroyed, both literally and figuratively, and I had no idea what to do next. I stayed on that bench for what felt like hours, my mind spinning in circles. The explosion, the fight, Abigail's betrayal, all of it seemed surreal, like I had somehow stepped out of my life and into someone else's nightmare. I didn't know how to pick up the pieces, or if I even wanted to. Eventually, the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park. I couldn't sit there forever. I had to face the aftermath, face my son, face my mother. But most of all, I had to figure out what came next. Slowly, I stood up, my legs stiff from sitting for so long. I started walking back to my mother's house, dreading the questions I knew would be waiting for me. My phone buzzed again in my pocket, but this time I didn't look at it. I didn't want to talk to anyone, least of all Abigail. When I finally arrived at my mother's house, the sun had completely disappeared behind the horizon. The lights inside the house were warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the cold darkness I felt inside. I paused for a moment before opening the door, trying to collect myself. I didn't want to scare my son, and I wasn't ready for the inevitable questions. As soon as I stepped inside, my mother appeared in the hallway, her face filled with worry. "Mick, what happened? You look terrible." I forced a weak smile. "I'm fine, Mom. Just had a lot to think about." She studied my face, not convinced, but thankfully didn't push further. "Your son's in the living room, playing with his toys." I nodded, grateful for the brief reprieve. I walked into the living room and found my little boy on the floor, engrossed in a game with his toy cars. Seeing him so innocent and unaware of everything that had happened was like a punch to the gut. He looked up at me and grinned, his eyes lighting up with excitement.
Daddy.
"Look, I built a racetrack." I knelt beside him, forcing myself to smile. "That's amazing, buddy." We played for a while, but my mind was elsewhere. My thoughts kept drifting back to the house, to Abigail, to the explosion. Eventually, my mother came in to check on us, and I told her I needed some time to myself. I retreated to the guest bedroom, collapsing onto the bed. The weight of everything pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe. I pulled out my phone, staring at the screen for a long time before finally opening the message from Abigail. It was a single line. "I'm sorry." Sorry wasn't enough.
Not now.
Not after everything that had happened. But I didn't know how to respond, so I didn't. I put the phone down and stared at the ceiling, feeling utterly lost. The days that followed were a blur of police reports, insurance claims, and difficult conversations. The explosion had been smaller than I anticipated, causing some damage, but not enough to completely destroy the house. Abigail had been shaken but unharmed, and the young man who had been with her was already long gone by the time investigators showed up. I didn't know if he would ever face any consequences, and frankly, I didn't care. My focus was on my son, and trying to figure out how to move forward. Abigail sent more messages in the days after the incident, trying to explain herself, trying to apologize, but I couldn't bring myself to read most of them. The damage had been done. I didn't know if I could ever forgive her, and I wasn't sure I even wanted to try. It was time to move on, time to let go of the life I thought we were building together. My son became my anchor in the storm. Every time I felt like I was drowning in the chaos of it all, I would focus on him, his smile, his laugh, his innocence. He didn't understand what was happening, didn't know why Mommy wasn't around as much anymore, and I did my best to shield him from the worst of it. Eventually, Abigail and I had the conversation we had both been dreading. We met in a quiet cafe, far from the memories of our old life. She looked tired, her once vibrant energy dulled by guilt and regret. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen, Mick," she said softly, staring down at her coffee cup. "I was lost. I don't know how I let it get so far." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I didn't want to make this harder than it already was. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she continued, her voice trembling. "I know I don't deserve it, but I hope, for the sake of our son, we can find a way to move forward, even if it's separately." I took a deep breath, the weight of her words settling over me. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Abigail, but we have a child to think about. We need to figure out how to make this work for him." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I know. And I'll do whatever it takes to make sure he's okay." It wasn't the closure I wanted, but it was the best we could do. The pain of what she had done would take a long time to heal, if it ever did. But I knew I had to focus on what mattered most, my son, and the life we still had ahead of us. As the months passed, I found a new rhythm. Abigail and I remained civil, co-parenting as best we could, but the distance between us was undeniable. I moved back into the house, though it no longer felt like home. It was just a place, a reminder of what had been, and what had been lost. But slowly, things began to improve. I spent more time with my son, rebuilding our bond. My mother's support helped me through the hardest days, and eventually, I started to feel a glimmer of hope for the future. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it was a life I could live with. And, in the end, that was enough.